I made this video because, like many other Canadians, I am outraged by how little the government is supporting workers and small businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. I saw a video on CBC where a small business owner just like me, her name is Liz, she owns a pub in Toronto, she asked a really simple question to the finance minister, and his response is really what triggered me to make this. Here, take a look for yourself.
What are you feeling like at this time?
Terrified, to be honest. This industry operates with very slim margins.
But I'm just wondering, as you listened yesterday to what the finance minister was saying, do you think he was successful? Do you think the government was successful in helping Canadians like you in these difficult circumstances?
Not for my industry. There wasn't very much that I understood that could be helpful. Of course, the wage subsidy wouldn't help at all, and 10% would go nowhere. But the more important point is that we don't need more loans.
We did give a wage subsidy for those businesses that can keep people on. We've given them a subsidy.
10%. She thought that wasn't enough when some other countries are doing 75, for example.
I appreciate that, and people will have their points of view of how we should do things.
I think I know why the government is incapable of responding in a real, effective way, and I'm going to pose that in this video. So I argue that the government has a policy of extraction, where they extract your surplus energy in the form of taxes, and they give it to already profitable businesses and institutions like banks that don't actually need it. Here's the flow of extraction in Canada today. You work really, really, really hard. The government takes a cut of your energy in the form of taxes. It puts that surplus energy into a pool, and then it spends this energy on things for the common good. And I'll be honest, I do think in large part they're successful at it. I mean, personally, when my son was born, we had a state-of-the-art hospital. It was almost like Star Trek. And the school he's gonna go to in 3 years down the street, brand new school, looks beautiful. But here's the problem. The government also gives some of your surplus energy in the form of no-interest loans, asset purchases, and subsidies to already profitable companies and institutions that don't actually need it. Like in 2008, the government gave over $110 billion to the big banks of Canada, free, interest-free. Those banks, those same years, posted $1 billion in profits. Another example is where the government purchased an American pipeline for $12 billion.
When we're faced with an exceptional situation that puts jobs at risk, that puts our international reputation on the line, our government's prepared to take action. The federal government has reached an agreement with Kinder Morgan to purchase the existing Trans Mountain pipeline.
And that was an American company. So $12 billion of your surplus energy was handed to people who live in Texas at Kinder Morgan. In one case, there was a Canadian company called Bombardier, and they took hundreds of millions of dollars of Canadian taxpayer money in a no-interest loan. All they said is, you just pay us back when you start selling planes. We'll just take a royalty of the plane. If you don't sell planes, don't worry, you don't have to pay it back. And the next week, they gave their executives millions of dollars in bonuses, and they laid off some of their workers.
Bombardier executives saw their compensation rise by nearly 50% last year. At the same time, the company was laying off thousands of its workers. Can you justify to taxpayers why the federal government lent Bombardier $372.5 million if the company has the money to pay their top executives so lavishly?
We know that like the auto sector, aerospace is one of the areas in which Canadians excel. And that's exactly where we know we're going to be creating good jobs and opportunities for Canadians for years to come.
As a follow-up, why should taxpayers trust your government with their hard-earned money when you're lending it to a company that put millions in compensation for its executives ahead of preserving some Canadian jobs?
As people know, we respect the free market and the choices that companies will make.
Do you think any of us can get loans like that? And yet we're the ones who pay the tax money that the government used to give to that aerospace company. This is extraction. We have $110 billion for the profitable banks. We have $12 billion for a US-owned pipeline. And the best the government can do in the COVID pandemic, $82 billion for 35 million Canadians. So I wanted to see firsthand how the government is helping workers. And so I called the EI office today, and this is what I got.
If you are not sick or in quarantine due to the coronavirus, please stay on the line to be authenticated and choose an option.
Due to high call volume, we're not able to take your call right now. Please visit us online at canada.ca or try your call again later. Thank you for your call.
I then went and looked online, and it turns out there's no extra help for people on EI. And if you can't go on EI because you're a contractor or a freelancer, you have to wait till sometime in early April to even get a notion of the help you're going to get. And then after you apply, you have to wait 10 days. So it's March 25th today. You're not going to get help for 20, 25 days. So if we took that $110 billion that the government gave to the big banks, and we gave that to the 1.9 million small businesses in Canada, that would equal out to $57,894 for each small business. After all, small businesses create 70% of the taxpayers in our country. In my case personally, I had the accountant run the numbers for me. And in the last 5 years, just me, my wife, and my small business have generated almost $1.5 million in tax revenue for the government. $1.5 million that our tiny little wedding video company, with all of its employees and myself and my wife, have generated and given as surplus energy to the government. So I thought, after all, we gave these banks $110 billion. I'm sure they'll help my little small business, right? And so I called RBC, and this is what I got. Has RBC gotten any mandates to change how they assess loans?
Yeah, so in terms of new credit, we're still following the same guidelines.
And with the term loans and everything, are you guys still charging interest?
Yeah.
Yeah, just, I don't know, if you can talk to your boss and maybe he can run it up the chain to that big cartel who meets and makes these decisions, that charging Canadians interest when they're ordered to go home and not work it just seems a little bit predatory.
Yeah, no, I understand. My boss understands as well. He's getting all these emails as a lot of clients are feeling the same way.
So I've been with you for 10 years. I've never missed a payment. We're in a global pandemic. Since you've rejected my application for more credit line increase, is my next option to go to the BDC?
Yeah.
So now she's sending me to the BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. And just to be clear, I would have to pay interest from basically the moment I take the loan, the interest will start to be charged?
Yes. Capital payments are deferred.
And with respect, if I may ask, I know that you're not the one in authority, but maybe you can tell your boss or something, how am I supposed to pay interest if the government has demanded that I close my business?
I understand.
What if the government would just help us with our mortgage or rent payments? And I was really curious about this, so I called our mortgage lender, and this is what I got.
Thank you for calling CMLS Customer Service. Please leave your name, mortgage number, and reason for calling, and we will have a mortgage specialist contact you within 1 business day.
So here's what you have. Okay, I'm a Canadian citizen, small business owner. I've generated $1.5 million in tax revenue in the last 5 years. I've called EI, the BDC, RBC, my mortgage lender, and not a single one of them have offered me 1 penny of help. What the government should do is enable. Enablism argues simply that you use the surplus energy of taxpayers to enable more surplus energy from more taxpayers. It creates a virtuous cycle of growth, to borrow from business terminology. So in this example of the COVID crisis, what the government would do to enable us to keep paying taxes would be, for example, 1, keeping people from defaulting on their mortgages, as you saw, not happening. Or 2, making things easier for small businesses like Liz's or mine to stay alive during a pandemic. It's not happening. Or 3, increasing everybody's EI by 10 or 20%. It's just not happening. What we've seen here with the government's extractionist policies is they've been caught out, right? They are trapped now because they just spent $110 billion on the banks, they just spent $12 billion on the pipelines. All of my neighbors are suffering. All of my staff are suffering. My family is suffering. And yet the Bombardier CEO gets a $9 million bonus the same year that he gets a $370 million interest-free loan from the government. That's not right. I really do fear that the cost of the Canadian government's extractionist policies are going to make themselves very clear with this COVID pandemic. So I'm asking you, government, enable me to enable you to actually solve these crises. Stop giving my money away to big companies that don't need it.